Get up now! The screech tore through the hushed luxury of the first-class cabin. A glass of vintage Dom Perignon was slapped out of a 19-year-old girl's hand, soaking her grey hoodie. Every head turned. In seat 1A sat Maya, freezing in shock. Standing over her was a woman dripping in diamonds, screaming that a street rat had stolen her seat. The pilot threatened to arrest the girl. The passengers laughed. They thought they had won. They didn't know that the girl wasn't just a passenger. She was the only reason this airport was allowed to operate. And 5 minutes from now, nothing would be flying. The air inside the first-class cabin of Royal Horizon Flight 882 to London Heathrow smelled of leather, sanitized lemon, and old money. It was a smell 19-year-old Maya Washington knew well, though looking at her, you would never guess it. Maya adjusted her oversized, slightly frayed UNC college hoodie and pulled her noise-cancelling headphones down around her neck. She shifted in seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the Boeing 777. It was a suite really completely enclosed with a sliding door, a lie-flat bed, and a personal wardrobe. She looked tired. It had been a grueling semester at Georgetown, and her father David had insisted she fly home in comfort. "Just take the jet, Maya," he had argued over the phone 3 days ago. "No, Dad. It's wasteful for just me. Put me on commercial. I want to stay grounded," she'd joked. "Grounded?" He had laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "All right. But I'm booking you 1A on the Horizon flight. No arguments." So here she was. She tucked her beat-up Converse sneakers under the footrest and pulled out a battered paperback novel. She didn't look like the other passengers filing in. She didn't have the Louis Vuitton carry-on or the stiff, Botoxed expression of bored wealth. She looked like a kid who was ready to nap. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, Miss Washington?" The flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Sarah with a tight blonde bun, hovered with a silver tray. She smiled genuine warmth, likely refreshed to see a young, polite face instead of the usual demanding tycoons. "Just some sparkling water, please, with lime." Maya smiled back. "Of course." As Sarah turned to leave, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a drop in pressure, sudden and violent. 2 passengers were boarding. They took up the entire aisle, not just with their physical presence, but with the sheer volume of their ego. Leading the charge was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of marble and resentment. She wore a white Chanel blazer that probably cost more than Maya's tuition, huge sunglasses indoors, and dragged a platinum Rimowa suitcase. This was Corinna Sterling. She was the wife of a mid-level tech CEO, but she acted like she was the Queen of England. Behind her trailed her husband, Richard Sterling. He was on his phone barking about stock options, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too big. Corinna stopped at row 1. She looked at her boarding pass. 1B. Then she looked at the empty seat. B. Then she looked across the aisle to 1A. She saw the hoodie. She saw the messy bun. She saw the black skin. Corinna's lip curled. It was a visceral, physical reaction of disgust. She didn't sit down. She didn't put her bag away. She simply stood there, blocking the aisle for everyone behind her. "Richard," she snapped, her voice cutting through the soft jazz playing over the speakers. "What is it, Kay?" Richard didn't look up from his phone. "There is a problem. A hygiene problem." Maya didn't realize they were talking about her. She was reading the first page of her book. Corinna stepped closer, looming over Maya's suite. She tapped a manicured nail, blood red, hard against the privacy shell of Maya's seat. Click, click, click. Maya looked up, startled. "Excuse me." "You're in my seat," Karenna said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Maya blinked. She checked her ticket stub on the console. No. I'm 1A. You must be 1B." She pointed to the empty suite across the aisle. "That one is yours." Karenna laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Don't play dumb with me, little girl. I know how this works. You wait until the real passengers board, and then you try to sneak into the empty seats to take a selfie for your little Instagram. Get up." "I have a ticket," Maya said, her voice calm. She had been raised to handle high-pressure situations. Her father wasn't just a businessman. He was a titan of industry. She had sat at dinner tables with senators and warlords. A woman in a Chanel blazer didn't scare her. "Let me see it," Karenna demanded, holding out her hand. "No," Maya said simply. "I showed it to the gate agent. That's enough." Richard finally looked up from his phone. He saw his wife fuming and a young black girl in a hoodie sitting in the seat he secretly wished he had booked. "What's the hold-up? We're blocking the line." "This person is refusing to move. She's obviously a stowaway, Richard. Look at her. She's wearing gym clothes." Karenna gestured at Maya's leggings as if they were covered in toxic waste. "I'm not spending 7 hours across the aisle from someone who looks like they just robbed a convenience store." "Ma'am?" Sarah, the flight attendant, hurried back, balancing the sparkling water. "Is there a problem?" "Yes." Karenna spun around her handbag, nearly knocking the tray out of Sarah's hands. "Why is there a child in first class, and why is she dressed like that? I paid $12,000 for these tickets. I expect a certain caliber of environment." Sarah kept her professional smile, though it was straining at the edges. "Ms. Washington is a ticketed passenger, Mrs. Sterling. Please take your seat so we can finish boarding." "Washington," Richard scoffed. "Like Denzel." "Please. She's probably using a stolen credit card points account. I want you to check her ID again." "Sir, we have checked." "Check it again," Karenna shrieked. The volume was so loud that passengers in business class were craning their necks. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't. She is making me feel unsafe." Maya sat up straighter. "Unsafe? I'm sitting here reading a book." "You're aggressive," Karenna shouted, pointing a finger in Maya's face. "You're being hostile. I want her off this plane." The cabin was now fully silent. The soft jazz seemed to have stopped out of embarrassment. Maya looked at Sarah. "I'm not moving. I paid for this seat." "You paid?" Richard laughed, stepping into the fray. He was a large man, sweating slightly. He leaned over Maya, invading her personal space. The smell of expensive scotch and aggression wafted off him. "Listen here, sweetie. My wife wants to sit in 1A because she prefers the window on the left. You're going to take 1B, or better yet, you're going to go back to row 45 where you belong." "I am not switching," Maya said, her voice hardening, "and you need to step back." "Or what?" Richard sneered. "You gonna call your gang?" It was such a cliché, such a tired, racist line that Maya almost laughed. But the humiliation was starting to burn. Her cheeks felt hot. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers, a mix of pity and annoyance. Nobody stood up for her. A man in 1K, a banker type named Mr. Henderson, sighed loudly and checked his watch. "Can we just get this resolved? I have a meeting in London." He wasn't blaming the aggressors. He was blaming the victim for the delay. Sarah, the flight attendant, was trembling. She was young, and the Sterlings were Platinum Elite members. She knew the airline protocol: do not upset the high-value customers. "Ms. Washington," Sarah whispered, leaning down. "Maybe. Just to keep the peace. Would you mind moving to business class? I can get you a voucher." Maya looked at Sarah with betrayal in her eyes. "You want me to move? I have the ticket for this seat. Why aren't you moving them?" "They are frequent flyers," Sarah stammered. "That's right," Karenna gloated. She reached out and grabbed Maya's sparkling water from the tray Sarah was holding. "She doesn't need this." Then, with a casual flick of her wrist, Karenna poured the ice-cold water onto Maya's lap. The gasp in the cabin was audible. The water soaked instantly into Maya's grey leggings and pooled on the leather seat. Maya jumped up, gasping from the cold. "What is wrong with you?" "Oops," Karenna smirked. "Slippery fingers. Now look, she's made a mess. She can't sit there now. It's unsanitary." Richard laughed. "Good one, Kay." "That is assault," Maya said, her hands shaking. She wasn't shaking from fear anymore. She was shaking from the Washington temper, the same temper her father used to crush competitors who lied to him. "It was an accident." Karenna lied smoothly. She looked at Sarah. "Clean this up and get this trash off the plane before she causes a scene. Look, she's shouting now. She's unstable." "I want the pilot," Maya said. Her voice was deadly quiet. "Get the pilot, now." "Oh, goody, let's get the captain," Richard mocked. "I'm sure he'll love to hear how a teenager is holding up his flight." Sarah ran to the cockpit. Moments later, Captain Miller emerged. He was a stern man with silver hair and little patience. He saw the wet seat, the angry wealthy couple, and the young black girl in a hoodie. He made a calculation. It was the wrong calculation. "What is going on here?" Miller barked. "She attacked me," Karenna cried out, putting a hand to her chest, transforming instantly into the victim. "She threw water on herself to frame me, and she's been screaming profanities. We don't feel safe flying with her." "That is a lie," Maya said firmly. "Check the cameras, or ask her." She pointed to Sarah. Captain Miller looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Richard Sterling, who was glaring at her with a look that said, "I will have your job if you speak against me." It happened very fast, Captain," Sarah mumbled, looking at the floor. There was water spilled. Miller turned to Maya. "Miss, I don't know how you got up here, but I have a flight schedule to keep. You're disrupting my aircraft." "I have a ticket," Maya repeated, reaching for her phone. "Let me call my father. We can sort this out." "We don't have time for phone calls to Daddy," Miller snapped. "You have two choices. You take a seat in economy right now, or you get off my plane." Maya looked around the cabin. Every face was turned away or looking at her with disdain. The injustice was so thick it felt like it was choking her. "I paid for first class," Maya said. "Economy, or the terminal. Choose," Miller said, crossing his arms. "Fine," Maya said. She grabbed her backpack. She didn't wipe the water off her legs. She stood tall despite the humiliation. "I'm not going to economy. I'm getting off." "Good riddance," Karenna hissed. "Don't forget your trash." Maya stopped at the door of the plane. She turned back to look at Captain Miller, Sarah, and the smirking Sterlings. "You're making a mistake," Maya said softly. "A very expensive mistake." "Get off the plane, kid," Richard laughed. "Go take the bus." Maya stepped onto the jet bridge. The heavy door of the Boeing 777 slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate and theirs. Maya walked up the jet bridge. The cold air of the terminal hit her. She was shivering partly from the wet clothes, partly from the adrenaline dumping into her system. She found a bench near gate B12. She didn't cry. Washingtons didn't cry when they were insulted. They strategized. She pulled out her phone. Her lock screen was a picture of her and her dad fishing in Montana. She unlocked it and scrolled to, "Dad, do not ignore." It rang once. "Maya." His voice was warm, instantly soothing. "You boarding? You should be in the air in 10 minutes. "Dad," Maya said. Her voice cracked just a little. The tone on the other end changed instantly. The warmth evaporated, replaced by the sharp, terrifying focus of a predator. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" I got kicked off the plane, Dad." Silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the phone line was vibrating. "Explain," David Washington said. One word. Maya told him everything. The hoodie, the Sterlings, the hygiene comment, the water. The captain refusing to listen. The humiliation. "They called me a street rat, Dad. They said I didn't belong." "Who?" David asked. "I want names. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, Richard and Karenna, and the pilot, Captain Miller, Royal Horizon Flight 882. "Where are you now?" "Gate B12, sitting on a bench. My legs are wet." "Are you safe?" "Yes, just humiliated." "Maya," David said, his voice dropping an octave. It was a voice that commanded armies of employees and shifted global markets. "Wipe your face. Sit up straight. Do not move from that bench." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure they understand exactly who you are." "Dad, don't do anything crazy. Just book me another flight." "No," David said. "They humiliated my daughter. They threw water on you. They compromised the integrity of my airport." Maya paused. "Your airport? Who do you think supplies the jet fuel for this entire hub, Maya? Who owns the ground handling logistics? Who owns the hangars they park in?" Maya knew her dad was powerful. He was the CEO of Aero Global Logistics, but she often forgot the scale of it. He didn't just move boxes. He owned the infrastructure that made air travel possible in 3 states. "Dad, hang up Maya. Watch the windows." "What?" "Watch the plane. I'll be there in 20 minutes." The line went dead. Maya looked out the massive terminal windows at Flight 882. The tug truck was already pushing it back. The engines were spooling up that familiar high-pitched whine. They were leaving. They had won. Or so they thought. Inside the plane, Karenna was settling into seat 1A, Maya's seat. She had placed a blanket over the wet spot. "Finally," she sighed, accepting a fresh glass of champagne. "Peace and quiet. I tell you, Richard, the airline standards are slipping, letting riff-raff like that in here." "You handled it, babe," Richard toasted her. "To us." "To us?" They clinked glasses. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and then abruptly the plane stopped. It wasn't a slow stop. It was a lurching halt. The lights in the cabin flickered and died. The emergency lighting hummed on a sickly blue. The engines, which had been winding up for takeoff, spooled down into a dead silence. "What is that?" Karenna asked, annoyed. "Why did we stop, ladies and gentlemen?" Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom, sounding confused. "We seem to have lost power from the ground units, and, well, this is strange. Tower has ordered us to hold position immediately." Richard looked out the window. "What the hell?" Outside on the tarmac, it looked like an invasion. 3 massive black SUVs with flashing orange lights were tearing across the tarmac, ignoring all speed limits. They were followed by 2 heavy-duty fuel tankers and a fleet of airport security vehicles. They weren't coming to help the plane. They were surrounding it. The SUVs screeched to a halt right in front of the Boeing 707's nose gear, blocking its path completely. The fuel tankers pulled up behind the engines, boxing the plane in.
Are those police?
Karenna asked, her voice trembling slightly. No, Richard said, squinting into the darkness. That's not police. That's operations. The door of the lead SUV flew open. A man stepped out. He was tall, black, wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than Richard's car. He walked with a limp, using a cane with a silver eagle's head handle. He didn't look at the plane. He pointed at the ground crew. He made a cut-it motion across his throat. Instantly, the ground crew disconnected the auxiliary power unit. The plane went completely dark. No AC, no air.
Who is that?
Karenna whispered. Richard's face went pale. He recognized the man from the cover of Forbes magazine. He recognized the man who had just signed the contract to acquire Richard's own struggling tech company last week.
Oh my God, Richard breathed. That's David Washington. Who?
The guy who owns the airport, Richard said, sweat breaking out on his forehead. And I think that girl said her name was Washington. Inside the cabin of Flight 882, the atmosphere had shifted from annoyance to genuine fear. The modern Boeing 707, usually a marvel of engineering, had become a metal coffin. Without the auxiliary power unit APU or the engines running, the air circulation stopped immediately. The temperature began to rise. It wasn't a slow creep. With hundreds of bodies and the residual heat of the avionics, the cabin became stifling within minutes. The emergency lights cast ghoulish, flickering shadows across the faces of the first-class passengers. Karenna Sterling fanned herself with the safety card, her face flushed.
This is ridiculous. Richard, tell them to turn the air on. I can't breathe.
Richard was pale, staring out the window at the armada of black vehicles surrounding them. They can't, Karenna. The ground power is cut. We're dead in the water. Well, call someone. Call the senator, Karenna hissed. I have no signal, Richard whispered, holding up his phone. It's jammed. It wasn't technically jammed, but the dense positioning of the heavy logistical trucks and the interference from the secure comms channels outside had effectively created a dead zone. In the cockpit, Captain Miller was losing his composure. He toggled the radio to the tower. Tower, this is Horizon 882. We are being blocked by unauthorized vehicles, requesting immediate security assistance to clear the runway. Over. The radio crackled. The voice from the tower wasn't the usual air traffic controller. It was the airport director, Marcus Thorne. Horizon 882, this is Director Thorne. We cannot clear the vehicles. Those vehicles belong to Aero Global Logistics. They own the tarmac you are sitting on. They have declared a Level 4 security halt. Level 4. Miller wiped sweat from his brow. That's a terror threat. We are just a passenger flight. The report states that a passenger on board was assaulted, and the perpetrator is still at large within the cabin, and that the flight crew failed to neutralize the threat. Until the threat is removed, Aero Global has revoked your refueling and takeoff clearance. You are grounded, Captain. Miller stared at the radio. Assault. It was a spilled glass of water. Take it up with Mr. Washington, Captain. He is standing at your nose gear. Miller looked down. Through the cockpit glass, he saw the man in the suit, leaning against the landing gear, calmly checking his watch. It was a power move of terrifying proportions. David Washington wasn't just stopping a plane. He was showing them that time belonged to him. Back in the cabin, the murmurs were growing into shouts. "Why are we stopping? I have insulin in my bag. It's getting hot in here." Mr. Henderson, the banker in 1K, unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up and looked at the Sterlings. The sheen of sweat on his forehead made him look severe. "You," Henderson pointed at Karenna. "This is because of you." Karenna gasped, clutching her pearls. "Excuse me. I am a victim here." "You kicked that girl off," Henderson said, his voice rising. "And now we are surrounded. That girl, she wasn't nobody, was she?" The realization rippled through the first-class cabin like a virus. The passengers who had previously been complicit with their silence suddenly found their moral compasses when their own comfort was threatened. "She said her name was Washington," a woman in row 2 whispered. "Does anyone know who runs this airport?" Richard Sterling shrank into his seat. He knew. He knew exactly who it was. He was currently holding 40% of his company's debt in a portfolio managed by a subsidiary of Aero Global. If David Washington squeezed Richard, wouldn't just lose his flight. He would lose his house, his car, and his life. "Richard," Karenna whined. "Do something." "Shut up," Richard snapped, a vein bulging in his neck. "Just shut up, Karenna. You have no idea what you've done." Suddenly, the heavy thud of the jet bridge, reconnecting to the fuselage, echoed through the plane. It was a mechanical, ominous sound. Thunk. Whirr. The cabin door, which had been sealed for takeoff, was unlocked from the outside. Sarah, the flight attendant, stood by the door, terrified. She looked at Captain Miller, who had come out of the cockpit. "Open it," Miller said, defeated. "We have no choice." Sarah rotated the heavy handle. The door swung open. A rush of cold, fresh air from the terminal swept into the humid cabin. But nobody relaxed, because standing in the doorway was not the police. It was not it was Maya. She had dried her face. She was still wearing the wet leggings, the stained hoodie. She looked small against the backdrop of the industrial steel of the bridge. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood David Washington, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. And behind him were 4 men in dark suits who looked like they ate concrete for breakfast. David didn't shout. He didn't storm in. He stepped onto the plane with the elegance of a panther entering a cage of mice. He looked at the floor, saw the puddle of water still soaking the carpet near seat 1A. He looked up. His eyes swept over the cabin, silencing every single person they touched. Finally, they landed on seat 1B. "Mr. Sterling," David said. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth and deadly. "And Mrs. Sterling, I believe you have something that belongs to my daughter." Karenna Sterling did the only thing she knew how to do as she attacked. She stood up, smoothing her blazer, trying to summon the entitlement that had shielded her for 40 years. "Who do you think you are? You can't just storm onto a plane. This is a federal violation. I will have you arrested." David didn't even blink. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Richard. "Richard," David said calmly, "your wife seems to be under the impression that she is in charge. Would you like to explain the situation to her, or shall I?" Richard scrambled out of his seat. He was sweating profusely, his expensive shirt clinging to his chest. "Mr. Washington." "David." "Sir. Please, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We didn't know who she was." "Ah," David stepped closer. The cabin was deadly silent. "You didn't know who she was. So if she was just a regular student, a girl with no name, treating her like trash would have been acceptable, is that it?" No. "Of course not," Richard stammered. It was just, tensions were high. We were tired. My daughter is tired, David said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. She just finished finals. She wanted to come home. And instead, she was assaulted. I didn't assault anyone, Karenna shrieked. I dropped a glass. It was an accident. She's lying. David held up a hand. One of the men behind him, a burly security chief named Gavin, stepped forward, holding a tablet. He tapped the screen and held it up for the cabin to see. It was footage, not from the plane, but from a passenger in 2A who had been filming the drama for TikTok. The video showed Karenna clearly, intentionally, vindictively pouring the water. It showed the sneer on her face. It captured the audio perfectly. Oops, slippery fingers. The internet is a fast place, Mrs. Sterling, David said. This was uploaded 12 minutes ago. It has 300,000 views. Karenna's face went white. Now! David turned to Captain Miller, who was cowering near the galley. Captain, you hold a duty of care to your passengers. My daughter appealed to you for help. You threatened to arrest her. Sir, Miller stammered. I followed protocol for a disruptive passenger. Disruptive? David laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She was reading a book. You saw a black girl in a hoodie, and you saw a white woman in Chanel, and you made a choice. You chose the money. You chose the status. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He dialed a number on speaker. Yes, Mr. Washington, a voice answered. It was the CEO of Royal Horizon Airlines, Jonathan Vance. Jonathan, David said, I'm on flight 882. I'm looking at Captain Miller. He just facilitated a hate crime on your aircraft and kicked my daughter off the plane. He did what? Jonathan Vance's voice boomed. David, I am so sorry. Is Maya okay? She's wet. She's humiliated. And I am currently blocking your entire London corridor until this is rectified. Consider it rectified, Vance said. Put Miller on. David held the phone out to the captain. Captain Miller. Vance's voice was icy. Yes, sir, Miller whispered. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. Pack your bag. Get off the plane. You will face a disciplinary board tomorrow, but frankly, don't bother bringing a lawyer. You're done. Miller looked like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped against the bulkhead. And Jonathan, David added. The passengers in 1A and 1B, the Sterlings. Ban them, Vance said instantly. Lifetime ban. Global. They don't fly Horizon, they don't fly our partners. Get them off my aircraft. David hung up. He looked at Richard Sterling. You heard the man, David said. Get your bags. Richard looked at Karenna. The realization of what was happening was crushing him. David, please. The deal. The acquisition. We're supposed to close on Monday. If you pull out, my company collapses. I have 300 employees. David looked at Maya. Maya, what do you think? Should we buy Mr. Sterling's company? Maya stepped forward. She looked at Richard, then at Karenna. She saw the fear in their eyes, the same fear they had tried to inflict on her. No, Maya said softly. I don't think we should do business with people who lack basic humanity. They might treat the employees like they treated me. David nodded. You heard her, Richard. The deal is dead. I'm instructing my legal team to exercise the call option on your loans immediately. You have 24 hours to pay back the $12 million you owe me. Richard fell to his knees, literally dropped to the floor of the first-class cabin. No, please, that will bankrupt us. That's everything. You should have thought about that before you called my daughter a street rat, David said coldly. Gavin, remove them. The extraction of the sterlings was not dignified. Karenna refused to move. She clung to the armrest of seat 1A, screaming that she was a citizen, that she had rights. "You have the right to remain silent," a new voice boomed. 2 officers from the Airport Police Authority marched onto the plane past David and Maya. They weren't there for Maya. "Karenna Sterling," the lead officer asked, "we have a signed complaint for battery and disorderly conduct. You are under arrest." "Battery," Karenna screeched as they pulled her up. "It was water. You poured a liquid on a person with intent to harm and humiliate. That is battery in this state, ma'am. And given the flight crew's statement, we are adding interference with a flight crew, which is a federal felony." They cuffed her. The clicking of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. As they dragged a weeping, thrashing Karenna down the aisle, the passengers in economy who had been watching the drama unfold through the curtains started to clap. A slow clap at first, then a roar of applause. Richard Sterling followed them, carrying his bags. His head hung low. He was a broken man. He walked past Maya and stopped. He started. "Don't." David stepped in front of Maya. "Don't speak to her. You are not worthy of speaking to her. Go." Richard shuffled off the plane. The cabin was chinned again. The air was still hot, but the tension had broken. David turned to the passengers. "I apologize for the delay, everyone. A new flight crew is on their way. The AC will be on in 30 seconds. Open bar is on me for the duration of the flight." A cheer went up from the cabin. David turned to Maya. "Come on, baby girl. We're going home." "I'm not flying," Maya asked, looking at the empty seat. "Not on this plane." David smiled. "The jet is warmed up. Mom is waiting. And I think you need a shower and some dry clothes." They walked off the plane together. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Maya looked back one last time at seat 1A. It was empty, wet, and sad. She turned to her father. "Dad, yeah, did you really buy the debt on his company?" "I did," David said, checking his phone as they walked toward the terminal, where the private shuttle was waiting. "And I just sold it to a liquidation firm for pennies on the dollar. By the time Richard gets out of the taxi rank, his keycard won't work at his office." "That's brutal," Maya said. "It's business." David put his arm around her. "But defending you, that's personal. Nobody touches my family." The fallout. By the next morning, the story was global news. The video of Karenna pouring the water had 40 million views. The hashtag #AchadFirstClass Karen was trending #1 worldwide. But the real story was happening in the boardrooms. Sterling Tech Richard's company was in a death spiral. When the news broke that the acquisition by Aero Global was dead, the stock plummeted 75% in pre-market trading. The board of directors held an emergency meeting via Zoom. Richard didn't even get to log in. He received an email notification that he had been terminated for gross misconduct and reputational damage. Karenna spent the night in the county lockup. Her bail was set at $50,000, an amount they would usually sneeze at, but with Richard's accounts frozen by the bank, pending the loan recall, they couldn't access the cash. They had to call a bail bondsman. When Karenna walked out of the police station the next day, disheveled without her Chanel blazer, it had been seized as evidence she was met by a wall of paparazzi. She tried to hide her face, but there was nowhere to go. And Captain Miller. The pilot union refused to represent him. The video evidence of him sneering at Maya and ignoring the assault was too damning. He was fired with cause, meaning he lost his pension. The FAA opened an investigation into his conduct regarding the discriminatory removal of a passenger. His flying days were over. But the karma wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Maya was at home wearing fresh sweats, studying for her next semester. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the Dean of Georgetown University. Dear Ms. Washington, we were deeply disturbed to see the footage involving one of our students. We want to extend our support. She scrolled down. Furthermore, we have been made aware that Mrs. Karenna Sterling sits on the fundraising committee for the arts program. Please be assured she has been removed from this position, effective immediately, and she has been banned from campus grounds. Maya smiled. She forwarded the email to her dad. He replied instantly with a single emoji. The Eagle. The media suicide. 3 days after the incident on Flight 882, the world had not moved on. In fact, the algorithm was feeding on the Sterlings. The video of the water pour had been remixed, memed, and analyzed by lip readers. But Karenna Sterling, trapped in her own bubble of delusion, believed she could still win. She believed this was a PR problem, not a character problem. She hired a crisis manager named Silas, a man known for cleaning up the messes of disgraced politicians. His advice was simple. Disappear, go to a cabin in the woods, stay offline for 6 months. Karenna fired him on the spot. I will not hide, she declared. I am the victim here. I was provoked. Against all legal advice, Karenna agreed to an exclusive interview with Diane Sawyer-esque broadcast journalist Eleanor Vance, no relation to the airline CEO, just a coincidence of the industry. The interview was broadcast live. Millions tuned in. In the Aero Global penthouse, David and Maya watched from a leather sofa eating popcorn. She's wearing white, Maya noted, to look innocent. It won't help, David murmured. On the screen, Karenna sat stiffly. She squeezed out a tear. You have to understand, Eleanor. I was under extreme stress. The airport was crowded, and this person, she was encroaching on my space. I felt threatened. Eleanor, a veteran journalist with eyes like flint, didn't blink. Threatened Ms. Washington was reading a paperback novel. You were standing over her. We have security footage from the gate that shows you cutting in line 3 times before boarding. Is that consistent with someone who feels threatened or someone who feels entitled? Well, the footage is misleading, Karenna stammered. Let's talk about the water incident, Eleanor pressed. You claimed it was an accident, but we have a statement here from your former housekeeper, Maria. She claims you threw a hot latte at her in 2019 because it wasn't foam-heavy enough. She sued you for burns. You settled out of court. Is throwing liquids a habit of yours, Mrs. Sterling? Karenna's face crumbled. The mask of the victim slipped, revealing the snarling predator beneath. That maid was incompetent, just like that girl on the plane. You don't understand the pressure of being a job creator. My husband and I support the economy, and we get treated like criminals because of one little mistake. You aren't job creators anymore, are you? Eleanor said, delivering the kill shot. We have reports that Sterling Tech filed for Chapter 7 liquidation this morning. You're broke, Karenna. Karenna stood up, ripping her microphone off. Cut the feed. This is a setup. I'll sue you. I'll sue everyone. The screen went black. Maya looked at her dad. She didn't know. Richard didn't tell her yet. David replied, taking a sip of his drink. He was hoping to fix it before she found out. Too late. The repo men. The reality of hard karma isn't just about losing a job. It's about the slow, agonizing dismantling of a lifestyle. For Richard Sterling, the end didn't come with a bang, but with the squeak of rubber soles on marble. He sat in the foyer of his $6 million mansion in the Pacific Palisades. The front door was open. A team of movers was efficiently, quietly stripping the house. But these weren't movers he had hired. These were asset recovery agents. "Careful with that painting," Richard shouted instinctively as two men lifted a Basquiat print off the wall. "That's an original," the lead agent. A man with a clipboard didn't even look up. "It's lot number 404, Mr. Sterling. It belongs to the creditor trust now." "I have until Monday," Richard pleaded, sweat dripping down his nose. "My lawyer said I have until Monday to refinance. The clause was accelerated, sir. Gross misconduct triggers an immediate recall of all collateral. You signed the contract." Richard slumped onto the stairs. He watched his life leave the house. The grand piano, the imported sculptures, the wine collection. It was all going into trucks labeled Aero Global Asset Management. Then the driveway gravel crunched. Karena's Mercedes, which she still had, screeched to a halt. She stormed in fresh from her disastrous interview. "Richard?" "My credit card was declined at the gas station." The attendant cut it up. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" She stopped. She saw the empty walls. She saw the men packing up the antique rug she loved. "Richard." Her voice trembled. "What is happening?" "It's over." "Kay," Richard whispered, putting his head in his hands. David Washington didn't just buy the company debt. He bought the personal guarantees, the house, the cars, the boat. It's all his. "No." Karena shook her head, her eyes wide with a manic refusal to accept reality. "No." "Call him, apologize, beg him." "I tried," Richard screamed, finally snapping. "I called his office 50 times. I sent emails. I even sent a handwritten letter." "He won't speak to me." "Then we go to him," Karena hissed. "We go to his office and we don't leave until he fixes this." The final meeting. David Washington didn't usually take meetings with people he had destroyed. He preferred to let the lawyers handle the debris. But Maya had asked for this. "I want them to see," she had said. "I want them to see that it wasn't about the seat. It was about the dignity." So on a rainy Tuesday, Richard and Karena Sterling were granted a 15-minute slot at the Aero Global headquarters. They didn't arrive in a limo. They took an Uber X, and the driver had rated them 1 star because Karena complained about the smell of his air freshener. They walked into the lobby. It was a cathedral of glass and steel. They were escorted not to the boardroom, but to a smaller glass-walled conference room overlooking the airfield. Inside, David sat at the head of the table. He was reading a file. He didn't stand up. Maya sat next to him. She wasn't wearing a hoodie today. She was wearing a tailored navy suit, her hair in braids, looking every inch the heiress and future CEO she was. Richard walked in, hunching his shoulders. He looked 10 years older than he had on the plane. Karena was silent, clutching a knockoff handbag. Her Birkins had been seized. "Sit," David said. They sat. "We are here," Richard started, his voice cracking, "to humble ourselves. David, Mr. Washington, we behaved abominably. We are paying the price. But please have mercy. We have lost everything. We are facing bankruptcy. We might lose our pension. We are willing to make a public apology," Karena added, trying to sound negotiating. "A joint press conference. We will say whatever you want." David closed the file. He slid it across the table. "Open it." Richard opened the folder. Inside was a legal document. "What is this?" Richard asked. "That whole..." Maya spoke up, her voice clear and strong, "is the deed to your house and the ownership papers for Sterling Tech." Richard's eyes lit up. Hope, cruel and bright, flared in his chest. You're giving it back." "No," Maya said. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the planes taking off. "Do you know what I study at Georgetown, Mrs. Sterling?" Maya asked. Karenna blinked. "Business, sociology, and civil rights law," Maya said. "I wrote my thesis on the intersection of wealth and systemic inequality." She turned back to them. "When my father acquired your company, we did an audit. We found that you were underpaying your female staff by 20%. We found emails from you, Richard, mocking your custodial staff. We found that you illegally denied overtime pay to your junior developers." Richard went pale. Everyone does that. It's the industry." "Not anymore," David said. "I dissolved Sterling Tech yesterday." "Dissolved it?" Richard gasped. "But the IP, the software." "We kept the software," David said. "And we transferred all 300 employees to a new division of Aero Global. They all kept their jobs. In fact, we gave them a 15% raise and full benefits. They are very happy. They don't miss you." "And the house," Karenna whispered. "My beautiful house. It is a beautiful house," Maya agreed. "That's why we donated it." "Donated it?" Karenna looked like she was going to be sick. "It is now the Maya Washington Transitional Housing Center," Maya smiled. "It will provide temporary luxury housing for single mothers who are finishing their college degrees. The first 4 families move in on Friday. They are going to love the pool." Silence. Absolute crushing silence. Richard stared at the table. The magnitude of his loss was total. His legacy wasn't just gone. It had been inverted. Everything he had built to exclude people was now being used to elevate the very people he looked down on. "Why?" Richard croaked. "Why go this far? You won. You kicked us down. Why bury us?" David leaned forward. The predator was back in his eyes. "Because you didn't just insult my daughter, Richard. You tried to make her feel small. You tried to make her feel like she didn't belong in the sky. So I decided to ensure that the only place you will ever belong is the ground." David pressed a button on the intercom. "Security. Escort the guests out." "Wait." Karenna stood up. "What about us? What do we do?" David shrugged. "I hear the bus is hiring drivers. It's honest work. You'll be transporting people, just like a pilot." The final twist. As the security guards led the broken couple to the elevator, Maya called out, "One more thing." Richard turned back. He looked hollow. "I actually did have a hygiene problem that day," Maya said. "What?" Richard asked, confused. "I had been volunteering at a soup kitchen in D.C. before the flight," Maya said. "I spilled soup on my jeans. That's why I was wearing the leggings. I was tired because I had spent 6 hours feeding people who had nothing. You looked at me and saw trash. But the people at that shelter looked at me and saw a savior." She paused. "Character isn't what you wear, Mr. Sterling. It's what you do when you think no one is watching. And you're ugly. Inside and out." The elevator doors closed 6 months later. The YouTube video titled "First Class Racist vs. Billionaire Dad" sits at 140 million views. Richard Sterling works as a consultant for a mid-level logistics firm in Ohio. He flies economy. He sits in the middle seat. He never complains. Every time he sees a young person in a hoodie on a plane, he flinches. Karenna Sterling divorced him. She tried to write a tell-all book, but no publisher would touch it. She now lives in a small condo in Arizona and manages a retail store. Last week, a customer threw a soda at her. She didn't sue. She just cleaned it up. Captain Miller is currently a driving instructor. Maya Washington graduated summa cum laude. She is now the Vice President of Community Outreach at Aero Global. She still flies commercial sometimes. She still wears a hoodie. But now, when she boards a plane, the flight attendants don't ask to see her ticket. They just smile and say, "Welcome back, Ms. Washington. Seat 1A is ready for you." And on the wall of the Aero Global boardroom, there is a new framed photo. It's not a plane. It's a picture of 4 young mothers and their children swimming in the pool of a mansion in Pacific Palisades, laughing under the California sun. Below it, a brass plaque reads, "In honor of Flight 882, where we learned that the highest class isn't about the price of the ticket. And that is the story of how one moment of arrogance cost a couple their entire empire. It's a brutal reminder that you never truly know who you are talking to. In a world where cameras are everywhere and "Do you know who I am?" is a dangerous game. The Sterlings learned the hardest lesson of all. Humble yourself or life will do it for you. Maya didn't just win. She turned their hatred into a home for those who needed it most. That is the ultimate victory, not just defeating your enemy, but replacing their negativity with something beautiful. What would you have done if you were David Washington? Was taking their house too far? Or was it exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of extreme karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching and stay humble.